Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be tackling a subject that's been all over the news and that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
It's tariffs.
Yeah.
You've probably been hearing a lot about it.
Yeah.
And you're smart to pay attention
Yeah.
because this isn't just, some, abstract economic theory.
Right.
This is stuff that can really hit your wallet.
Yeah.
And we've got a stack of sources here today.
We do.
Expert analysis, news reports. We've even got some spicy social media takes in there.
Love it.
And we're going to try to break it all down for you today and extract the insights that really matter.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating to see how these global economic policies can, actually have a ripple effect all the way down to your morning cup of coffee.
Right.
We'll be looking at everything from the price that you pay at the pump to the stability of your investment portfolio.
Okay, so let's unpack this thing.
Let's do it.
The big news that really shook things up was Trump's announcement of a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports,
Oh.
including those from U.S. allies like Canada and Mexico.
Allies.
It's like he just threw a grenade into the global trade system.
Yeah, and this is quite different from, the previous tariffs, which were more targeted at China.
Right.
So hitting our allies adds just a whole extra layer of complexity and has definitely sent shockwaves through the markets.
Yeah.
And, one of the big things that we're seeing is this uncertainty.
Right.
It just makes it so hard for businesses to plan.
Yeah.
And that hesitation, it can trickle down to everything from hiring to new product development.
I read an anecdote about a private equity executive who compared the current economic policy climate to a clown show,
Wow.
which I think perfectly captures that feeling of unpredictability.
Yeah.
It's like, why make a major investment when the rules of the game could change completely tomorrow?
Yeah, that uncertainty is a major factor in the slowdown that we're seeing in mergers and acquisitions. Companies are just hitting the pause button on big decisions until the dust settles and they have a clearer picture of what the landscape is going to look like.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's like trying to build a house during an earthquake. You probably want to wait till the ground stops shaking.
Right.
And speaking of shaky ground, let's talk about stagflation.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's kind of a scary word, but some experts are worried that these tariffs could be the trigger.
Yeah, stagflation is this tricky situation where you get this nasty combo of stagnant economic growth and rising prices.
Right.
So think of it like this, your paycheck's staying the same, but everything's costing more.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is not a good situation.
No.
But is this a real possibility, or is this just like economists being all doom and gloom?
Well, projections from organizations like the Tax Foundation and the Peterson Institute suggest that even a 10% tariff on goods from China could shave 0.1% off GDP
Oh, cool.
while pushing inflation up by 0.2%.
Okay.
Those might seem like small numbers, but over time, it's like a slow leak in your tire.
Right.
Eventually, you're going to be stuck on the side of the road.
So how would that actually play out in my life? Like, what should I be watching out for?
For starters, your dollar won't stretch as far.
Right.
That morning coffee, that new gadget, that weekend getaway, it's all going to cost you more.
Right.
And if you're invested, stagflation can be a real drag on your portfolio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
It sounds like we need to buckle up because this could be a bumpy ride.
Buckle up.
Okay, so to make matters even worse, the Federal Reserve, which controls interest rates, is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Oh, yeah.
They're usually data dependent, meaning they make decisions based on, clear economic indicators.
Mm-hmm.
But these tariffs have just thrown a wrench in the works.
It's now they're having to factor in the, unpredictable impact of political decisions.
Right.
Something analysts are calling policy dependent.
Oh,
It's like trying to drive with a blindfold on. You never know what obstacle is going to pop up next.
yeah. So let me guess, to combat this potential inflation, the Fed might be forced to raise interest rates, even though they were previously hinting at cuts.
That's a real possibility, yeah.
Ugh.
And, higher interest rates mean you'll pay more to borrow money for things like a mortgage or a car loan.
Right.
And if you're invested in bonds, be prepared for some potential losses.
Okay, it seems like this whole tariff thing is a giant game of economic Jenga.
Oh, yeah.
One wrong move could bring the whole tower crashing down.
Exactly.
But before we spiral into complete panic, let's look at China's response.
Okay.
They didn't just sit back and take it, did they?
No, they did not. China strategically retaliated with their own set of tariffs, specifically targeting goods that would cause maximum pain for the U.S. while minimizing the damage to their own economy.
Right.
So, for instance, Goldman Sachs estimates those tariffs only cover about 10% of total U.S. exports to China,
Okay.
but they chose those products very carefully.
So they're playing the long game like a chess master, planning their moves carefully.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, how many of the things that we use every single day are labeled made in China?
So many.
Could those labels start to disappear?
If this trade war heats up, it's definitely possible we could see a shift in those global supply chains with companies looking for alternative manufacturing hubs outside of China.
Right.
But finding those alternatives takes time, and in the meantime, the things we're used to buying could get a lot more expensive.
Yeah, this is getting intense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about stagflation and potential market chaos, but what does all of this mean for the average person?
Yeah.
What should we be doing to prepare?
Well, the key takeaway here is that this isn't just about steel and aluminum. This is a symptom of a much larger shift in the global economic landscape.
Okay.
Trump's tariffs are part of this broader strategy to reshape trade deals and bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. But whether that will actually happen remains to be seen.
So it's a bit of a gamble
It is.
with potentially huge consequences for the global economy.
Yes.
What are some of the risks that we should be aware of?
Well, we're talking about a potential economic slowdown,
Right.
rising global tensions, and a possible return to protectionism.
Right.
Basically, everyone retreating into their own corners and building walls instead of bridges.
Right.
Not exactly a recipe for global prosperity.
Definitely not. And it's not just governments making these decisions. It's businesses. It's individuals, too. You know, we're all players in this high-stakes game.
Absolutely.
So what happens next? What should we be watching out for as this situation unfolds?
One of the key things is the reaction of businesses and consumers. If confidence starts to erode and people start pulling back on spending, that could be a signal that the economy is headed for a downturn.
Okay, so we need to watch how they react, how
Yeah.
they adapt, and how they plan for the future.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about what's happening in the commodity markets, because that's where we're already seeing some immediate effects of these tariffs.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the most striking examples of this is the impact on, regional commodity prices. We saw this with Canadian natural gas and crude oil last week,
Right.
and now we're seeing it with aluminum and steel.
Right.
The tariffs have created these significant price differences between, U.S. and Canadian products,
Yeah.
with U.S. premiums skyrocketing.
So it's like building a dam in the river of global trade.
Yeah.
You're going to see some pretty dramatic changes upstream and downstream.
Right.
But why is this happening?
Well, it's basic supply and demand.
Right.
With tariffs making imports more expensive, U.S. buyers are scrambling to find, alternative sources of steel and aluminum.
Right.
And that sudden surge in demand is driving up prices.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like a recipe for chaos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Won't this uncertainty disrupt the entire supply chain?
Precisely. It's like those supply chain issues we saw a few years back when the world went a little crazy for toilet paper and hand sanitizer.
Right.
But potentially on a much larger scale,
Yeah.
we're talking about, essential industrial materials here.
Right.
The building blocks of our modern economy.
That's a little unnerving, to be honest.
Yeah.
And what about energy prices?
Yeah.
Are those likely to be affected too?
Energy markets are always sensitive to, global economic conditions, and this tariff situation just adds another layer of complexity.
Right.
While there was a lot of talk about oil prices hitting $80 a barrel, some analysts are actually now revising their forecasts downwards.
Okay.
So instead of $80 for Brent crude oil, we might be looking at something closer to $75, with West Texas Intermediate hovering around $71, $72.
So does that mean we might actually see some relief at the gas pump?
Well,
Please tell me there's a silver lining somewhere in all of this.
it's possible, but it's not that simple.
Okay.
There are a lot of other factors at play.
Right.
Like the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Right.
Renewed sanctions on Russia could easily send energy prices soaring again.
Right.
And then there's OPEC
Plus
plus the cartel of oil-producing countries, which, they could decide to increase production in April,
Right.
flooding the market and pushing prices down.
Okay.
It's a bit of a geopolitical seesaw right now.
Okay, so let's talk about Europe for a moment, because they seem to be caught in the crossfire here.
They do.
They rely heavily on trade with the U.S., but they're also dealing with the fallout from the war in Ukraine, which has created its own set of economic challenges.
Exactly. Europe is in a really tough spot. It's, they have a trade surplus with the U.S., meaning they export more goods to us than they import.
Right.
But they also have a large services deficit.
Right.
And with the war in Ukraine disrupting energy supplies and driving up, domestic energy prices,
Right.
European industries are facing some serious headwinds.
Yeah.
It's a perfect storm of economic uncertainty.
It sounds like Europe is trying to walk a tightrope,
Yeah.
balancing their relationship with the U.S. while navigating the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine.
And there's a real risk that that tightrope walk could turn into a free fall if the U.S. imposes tariffs on European goods.
Oh.
That could trigger a retaliatory cycle with Europe responding with their own tariffs.
Right.
And no one wins in that scenario.
It's like a game of economic chicken, and no one wants to swerve first.
Nobody wants to swerve.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the potential impact of all of this on the U.S. economy as a whole.
Okay.
What are the experts saying?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is inflation.
Yeah.
When you slap tariffs on imported goods,
Right.
they become more expensive.
Right.
And those higher prices are often passed along to consumers. It's
Right.
like a chain reaction with each link pushing prices higher.
And isn't there a risk that this could spiral out of control?
There is.
Like if businesses have to pay more for materials, they raise prices, then workers demand higher wages to keep up.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got this runaway inflation train that's hard to stop.
You're exactly right. It's called a wage price spiral.
Mhm.
And it can be a real headache for policymakers.
Yeah.
It's like trying to squeeze a balloon. You push down on one side and it just pops out on the other.
Right. So are there any projections on how big of a hit the U.S. economy could take from these tariffs? Are we talking a fender bender or a total wreck?
The estimates vary, but some economic models suggest that a full-blown trade war could shave as much as 0.5% off U.S. GDP growth.
Okay.
That might not sound like a lot, but it's a significant chunk when you consider that the U.S. economy is already facing headwinds from rising interest rates and slowing global growth.
So the timing of these tariffs couldn't be worse.
It's definitely a risky move.
Right. It's like throwing a party when everyone's already feeling a little hungover.
Yeah, the U.S. economy is currently experiencing, a period of relatively strong growth, but that momentum could easily be derailed if businesses lose confidence and start pulling back on investment.
It's like a game of economic Jenga.
It is.
You pull out the wrong block and the whole thing could come tumbling down.
Exactly.
So with all these potential risks, is there any chance that this trade war could be averted? Could cooler heads prevail?
Well, diplomacy is always an option.
Right.
But it takes two to tango. It remains to be seen if the Trump administration is willing to come to the negotiating table and compromise.
Right.
They might be betting that China will blink first.
And could that happen?
It's possible,
Okay.
but China has shown a willingness to stand their ground.
Right.
They've already retaliated with tariffs of their own.
Right.
And they have a lot of leverage in this trade relationship.
Yeah.
Remember, they hold a significant amount of U.S. debt, and they could use that as a bargaining chip.
This is getting really interesting. It's like watching a high-stakes poker game, and we're all waiting to see who bluffs first.
It is.
So what should our listeners be paying attention to as this situation unfolds?
Okay.
What are the key indicators that things are getting better or worse?
One of the most important things to watch is the reaction of businesses and consumers.
Right.
If confidence starts to erode and spending pulls back, that could be a sign that the economy is headed for trouble.
Right, because ultimately it's the behavior of businesses and consumers that will determine the real impact of these tariffs.
All right.
If they start to panic, that could create a self-fulfilling prophecy leading to a downturn.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that economic policy is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right.
There are many other factors that will influence the direction of the U.S. economy in the coming months and years.
Okay, so we need to keep our eyes on the big picture, but also pay attention to the subtle shifts in consumer and business behavior. It's about reading the tea leaves and trying to anticipate the next move in this economic chess match. So let's shift gears now and explore the impact of these tariffs on a global scale. Because let's be honest, in today's interconnected world, what happens in one country can send shockwaves across the entire planet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, when the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. So how is this trade war playing out on the global stage?
Well, one of the most important things to understand is that the global economy is a delicate ecosystem. What happens in one part of the world can have a ripple effect across the entire system.
Okay.
Think of it like a spiderweb tug on one strand and the whole thing vibrates.
Right. Okay, so with these tariffs, what are some of the unintended consequences we might see in other parts of the world?
Well, one interesting trend is that China has been quietly diversifying its export markets in recent years. They're no longer as reliant on the U.S. as they once were, so that
Right.
they're better positioned to weather this storm.
So they've been playing 3D chess this whole time, anticipating a potential trade war with the U.S.
They've definitely been thinking ahead,
Okay.
and they're not alone.
Right.
Many countries are looking for ways to reduce their dependence on the U.S. market and build stronger trade relationships with other partners.
Right.
This shift in global trade patterns could have significant implications for the balance of power in the years to come.
This is getting pretty deep.
It
I'm
is.
starting to see how this whole tariff situation is just one piece of a much larger geopolitical chess game.
It is a high-stakes game, and the
Uh-huh.
players are not just governments. Businesses are also making strategic decisions about, where to invest, produce, and source their goods.
Right.
They're constantly adapting to the changing global landscape, trying to stay one step ahead of the competition.
So what does all of this mean for the average person? I
Yeah.
mean, how can we navigate this complex and uncertain economic landscape? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this information.
Well, one of the most important things is to stay informed.
Okay.
Don't just skim the headlines.
Right?
Dig deeper and try to understand the nuances of what's happening.
Okay.
Read analysis from different perspectives, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
So don't just read the headlines,
Yeah.
right? Go beyond the sound bites and try to understand the bigger picture.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
Right.
The more you understand about how the global economy works, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions about your own finances and investments.
So it's all about being proactive and taking control of our own economic destinies rather than just being swept along by the currents of global events.
Precisely. And remember, there's always opportunity in times of change by staying informed and adaptable. You can position yourself to not only weather the storm, but also potentially thrive in the new economic landscape that emerges. Think of it like surfing: the bigger the wave, the more exciting the ride.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the tariffs and talk about some of the potential winners and losers in this trade war because let's be honest, someone's got to benefit from all this, right?
Well, in the short term, domestic steel and aluminum producers in the U.S. are likely to see a boost in demand,
Okay.
as tariffs make imports more expensive, so their products will become more competitive, at least temporarily.
So those companies and their workers could see some gains.
Potentially, yes, but it's important to note that this could be a temporary benefit.
Yeah.
If prices rise too high, it could hurt other industries that rely on steel and aluminum as inputs,
Right.
like manufacturing and construction.
Right. That ripple effect. Again, what goes around comes around in the global economy.
Exactly. And in the long term, it's hard to say who will ultimately benefit from this trade war.
Right. There's a risk that it could lead to higher prices for consumers, slower economic growth, and even job losses in certain sectors.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Okay, so who are we keeping our eyes on as this unfolds? What are the things that we should be paying attention to in order to make informed decisions?
You know, one of the things that really stands out as a potential winner amidst all this uncertainty is gold.
Oh, yeah.
It often acts as this safe haven asset during, turbulent times.
Right. The classic flight to safety: when things get shaky, people flock to gold as a store of value.
Precisely. And we've already seen gold prices ticking upwards in recent weeks.
Mhm.
So if you're looking for ways to, hedge against potential economic turmoil, gold might be something to consider.
Interesting. So while some sectors are bracing for impact, others could actually benefit from this trade war. It's a reminder that even in challenging economic times, there are always opportunities to be found.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole situation so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a complex web of interconnected forces.
Right. And understanding how they all play out is crucial.
Yeah.
The decisions made in the coming months, not just by governments, but by businesses and individuals like yourself, will shape the global economy for years to come.
Okay, so to wrap this all up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to walk away with today?
I think the most important thing is to remember that this isn't just about steel and aluminum. This is about a fundamental shift in the global economic order. The rules are being rewritten, and the players are jockeying for positions. The question is, how will you adapt and thrive in this new landscape?
That's a fantastic point. It's a time of great uncertainty, yes, but also a time of immense opportunity for those who are willing to learn, adapt, and make informed decisions. It's about understanding the forces at play and positioning yourself accordingly. Don't be a pawn in this game, be a player.
Precisely. And remember, we're all in this together.
Mhm.
The decisions we make, both individually and collectively, will determine the course of the global economy.
Well, on that note, thanks for diving deep with us. We'll be back with another fascinating topic soon. Until then, keep those brains engaged and stay curious.